Good morning, everybody. I'm Mike Wright. I'm the Director of Communications and Membership at Bond. Delighted to be here today, just introducing this session on outsourcing HR. And we're working with a new partner to Bond, Hafton HR. Delighted to be working with them and with Anna Stobart, who's going to talk to you shortly. You're probably here because, like so many members of Bond, you're looking at your cost base, your squeeze for unrestricted funds, and you're looking at ways to sort of both make your operations more effective, but also cost effective. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons of that this morning. Just a bit of housekeeping. This session is recorded, so no need to make notes. We'll send you the details, the recording of the session once it's finished. Likewise, we'll send you the contact details for Anna and Hafton HR. There's plenty of time for questions, so if you've got questions, please drop them in the Q&A box or the chat box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to those at the end of the session and answer those. So great to have you here, Anna, and I'm going to hand over to you and to take us through the issues of outsourcing HR.
Great, thank you very much, Mike. Thank you for that introduction. So obviously we're going to be talking about outsourcing HR. In fact, I have Lisa Gardner on the call as well, who will be talking a little bit about her experience of outsourcing HR as on the receiving end. So we'll be hearing from her later. But what I wanted to start with is a kind of a direction of travel for this session this morning. So I want to set the scene about some of the challenging landscape that we have, talk about the different outsourced HR models that exist, and I'm sure there are others beyond the ones we talk about today, and consider why outsourcing all or part of your HR function is something to consider, and then talk about the benefits and then some of the drawbacks. So that's where we're headed this morning. So what is the challenging landscape? Well, Mike's already alluded to it a little bit, the fact there are so many cuts at the moment. It's interesting that 80% of USAID projects are officially closing, and the 20% that exist or still exist are going to be managed by their state department. And even those funds are going to be managed through the UN. So that feels a very centralized way of dealing with USAID. And this has affected the bigger international NGOs proportionally, but it is also affecting some of the smaller ones as well. On top of that, we've had the UK government who pledged 0.7% of funding to international development back in 2015-16, and now cutting that back to 5%, and now 0.5%, and now 0.3% because they want to focus on defence spending. So all of that is painting a picture of less funding in the sector. So just to give you a quick picture of the USAID cuts, you can see the dark areas are where it's worst affected and the paler colours less affected. So you see that Asia, West Africa, and also some of South America are being affected by the majority of the cuts. So this has really also led to some restructures in international NGOs. Now, restructuring is not a new thing for international NGOs because we've had somewhat of a precarious funding base for some organisations. So the restricted funding and knowing that people are on fixed term contracts has perhaps been part of the fact that we've had to restructure. But more and more now, the internal organisations are looking at what they can cut back on. I'm afraid that has to be the operational model. How can they cut the administrative costs and make most benefit for those that they're the beneficiaries that they're trying to support? Another element is also artificial intelligence. It keeps coming down the road, so all of us have to be aware of that and how that is going to change the nature of our work, not just in HR, but elsewhere in the organisation. So what policies are we going to need? What approach? What tasks are we going to trust to AI? And what functions can be simplified by AI? So that's something else that's really challenging HR teams as well as others. And then also the new Employment Rights Bill. Well, this has been on it's been on the books since 2003 and keeps being delayed, but it is coming slowly and surely. And that's another thing that organisations and particularly NGOs have to think about as they look at look to the future. So, what are the different models of outsourced HR? Well, firstly, there's the outsourcing the entire HR function. And it's interesting that some of the big utility companies and other big commercial companies have decided to do that with some mixed response. If you talk to anybody who's in a company that has totally outsourced HR, often they talk about the fact that they don't ever talk to the same person. They're talking to different people every time and maybe get a different answer, which is not always helpful. But outsourcing to a specialist HR consultancy, which manages the whole HR process, can work. But again, there's some questions that you need to be asking yourself to make sure you have the right response. HR consulting and fractional HR. So this is where you hire in experts who work on specific projects or on some of the strategic HR problems that you're trying to solve. But this can be combined with some internal HR. The sort of projects that work well with that are cultural change, training. It might be wanting to support your line managers and improve their line management in the organisation. So that can work with fractional HR. The other aspect is looking at HR information systems and software. Obviously, software has been around for a long time, but there's going to be more and more use of systems and software which can support outsourced HR. So it's not a standalone solution, although for some organisations, having a small amount of internal support plus good HR systems will be important. And there will see systems like ResumeMix or other CV reading software that you can use to really support long shortlisting and support your recruitment process. So that's something else to consider in terms of a model of outsourcing or HR. There's, of course, the hybrid model when you combine HR in-house generalist with outsourced specialists. So the functions like payroll, looking at benefits, looking at training, looking at staff engagement feedback can all be easily outsourced, again, with some support from internal HR. And then the final one is really shared services model. And this is where maybe a couple of organisations come together to say, well, we don't need a full-time HR person, but if we shared HR services between us because our mission, our culture, and what we do is very similar, that can work. I haven't come across many organisations that have done that, but that is another genuine outsourced HR model. I think the other thing to think about is the international aspect. There are global providers of HR, outsourced HR, but you really have to think about some of the issues around, for example, GDPR in Europe, thinking about the data laws in China, and maybe in the US, how they have state taxes and healthcare reporting. So every country location can be different. And it's important to have what they call nearshore, i.e. that you work with local HR people as well as a global practitioner. So the kind of questions that you need to be asking yourself when you're looking at international HR is, can they follow the rules in place where we do business, where we work? Do they have teams that understand the local cultures and language? And will our data be safe? Because that is a key thing in terms of GDPR. So why would you want to consider outsourcing all or part of your HR function? Well, the first one has to be cost savings. If you're trying to cut costs because of the cutbacks in funding, how can outsourcing HR help you? Well, in terms of outsourcing HR, I think it's Insignia reported that 57% of companies are outsourcing at least one aspect of their HR function. So if you look across the functions, payroll is an obvious one, maybe outsourcing training, maybe outsourcing the employee relations or the employee feedback engagement, and maybe the exiting interviews. So again, part of that could be fractional, but it's estimated that you can save up to 150% on the cost of your HR team. And each organisation is going to be different. So actually coming up with a figure for that is slightly, you don't know the actual costs until you go delve into the details. The second aspect is having access to expertise, and different HR companies have expertise. Some are generalists, some are specialists. So if you're using the fractional HR model, you might want to bring in expertise from different companies in order to support your HR team. And this way it ensures that the organisation has access to top tier expertise and practice while maintaining the internal HR team. The other aspect to consider is enhanced compliance. We've been talking about GDPR, but there are lots of aspects now where you need to comply with UK legislation around employment. And this can really help, particularly with the new Employment Rights Bill coming in, the fact that there are so many things that which will come in stages that you will need to be compliant with. And then there's scalability and flexibility. As organisations grow, it means that you can change your HR model. It means you may need less of one aspect of your HR function, and it means you can upgrade that or downgrade that depending on where you are in the scale of your organisation. It's important that you do this in conjunction with your outsourced HR provider so that they know exactly where your direction of travel is, so they don't get a surprise in that regard. And this helps particularly with restricted funding, because it means you can scale up and down depending on where that is going. So what about the downside? Well, there is a potential loss of control over key processes, and a number of organisations are really keen to keep their key processes. That might be their performance review process. It's how they determine their salary grading system, etc., their job architecture. Some of that they may want to keep in-house. That also can be outsourced with the right provider. The second aspect is communication barriers with external providers. Making sure that managers have access to the external HR provider is really important, because sometimes those messages between the external provider and the internal function doesn't quite happen. And I think that's about having a long-standing and a relationship that's built on over time. One aspect I've heard is the internal HR expertise feels undermined. And I think that can happen, but I think the role of the outsourced HR, and certainly this is what we aim to do at Hafton, is about building the expertise internally. So if we come into an organisation and manage a project with them, we want to work with the local HR team so that they can have the skills to do that particular project next time, or they just learn the skills from us about how we've handled it. So it enhances their expertise and their capacity. And it also enables line managers as well. Confidentiality risks. Well, that is really important, and it's so important that information doesn't leak out. So any external HR provider needs to be well versed in confidentiality and keeping your data safe. And consultants would definitely expect to sign an NDA agreement and ensure that they're keeping your data safe. The final one, I think, is there is a downside to being overly dependent on external providers. Yes, this can be a problem, but I think making sure again that the relationship is open and that you know the direction of travel of your external provider and also that you have standards that you hold them to, i.e. that if they're not meeting the standards or coming back to you in a timely way to provide the service that they've agreed to, then you need to be able to have that conversation. If there's no improvement, then you can say goodbye very quickly. So just some final thoughts on the whole aspect of outsourcing HR. I mean, I hope this short presentation, has given you some indication of the different ways in which you can outsource HR. But it is worth reflecting on the size and the complexity of your organisation, your culture, and your budget. And I think we have to say that there's no exact formula to say this is how you should manage your outsourced HR or indeed your internal HR. But working with the internal team is really important to make sure that this happens, so that the internal expertise is promoted and supported, and it doesn't detract from it. So thank you. So Lisa, I'm going to hand over to you now. I'm going to keep this slide up, but I'll let you talk about your real experience.
Thank you, Anna, and hello to everybody. I am a chartered accountant and I work as a Director of Finance, and in this job it's called Director of Finance and Organisational Effectiveness, but it's basically finance and operations. And for the many years that I have done this job, I have overseen HR as a function. So I've worked in quite a few different charities and worked as a trustee in different charities as well. And on the whole, we have outsourced HR for all of those reasons that Anna has outlined. And a lot of what I will say is probably going to just reinforce what she said. So my experience has been that we've had people within the charity who have HR experience, and then we've used external HR to complement that. So for the more complex employment law side of things, where you have disputes or disciplinaries, or there's change in legislation, so that the internal post will do the day-to-day kind of more admin side of HR, but we have used the external provider that has been a firm like Anna, or firm of lawyers who specialise in doing the outsourcing to help with those more complicated matters and kind of a higher level stuff. In the last few charities I've worked with, we've outsourced it completely, and I oversee the HR and often have a PA who works with me that will do some of the day-to-day, but we have no HR expertise ourselves other than experience, and so rely heavily on the outsource function to be able to help me provide that and work with me to apply those things that I know that should be done, but I'm not the expert in those fields. So I need to rely on someone who does have that expertise and that experience and knowledge and qualification to be able to apply that within the charities that I'm working with. I think the problem with working in charities is often, and I've seen this coming into various different ones, is that everybody within the charity generally wants to do the right thing for the charity, is passionate about the cause, and they don't always really understand the issues of HR and the legalities around HR. And I've come across things where the people within the organisation have promised things to staff without realising the implications of that. So having the external help there to say, actually, no, you can't do that, and to manage that situation, to make it compliant and legal, is absolutely essential. So that helps, and it also helps that it's an external person, because it's not someone looking like the bad person in the organisation, but that's just a by the way. So why have other reasons we've done it, exactly like Anna said, is that it's cost effective. The charity I work for at the moment is a UK based charity with subsidiaries in the African continent. So we've only got 17 to 20 permanent staff in the UK office, we can't justify having an HR person on board. So for us to have an external supplier that we can form a relationship with, that can provide that level of expertise that we require, is absolutely the right way to go. And it's a very cost-effective way for us to do that, because we don't have a permanent member of staff. It's a contract basis. It's we pay a monthly fee, and then there's there are various ways of doing it, but you can pay for the hours you get. So you're not adding an extra member of staff, and you're not then having to pay those costs that go alongside that, and then have someone who may not have the knowledge that we require over all of the entities and the complexity of the organisation, even though it's very small. With the international NGOs that we work with, having some outsourced supply means that we can then get the expertise of how to manage within those other countries as well. So it means that we're not trying to sort that out. We've got external help that can access the help with the international NGOs, and we've got people working within those countries that we oversee. And I say we because I'm working with Anna and her team all the time to enable that. So it means that we've got that sorted, and it doesn't mean a massive cost extra in our organisation, something we can manage. As I said, it's expert to expertise, it's that higher level stuff. And it's also the fact that when you've got an external supplier, they are working with multiple organisations. So pick up bits and pieces from other organisations as well. So you're not just reliant on this particular organisation, it's the experience of using of their experience in lots of different organisations, which really helps, because you get the best of both worlds in that case. As I've said, it's I think that the charities I've worked with, a lot of the people just don't understand the complexity. So it is that making sure that we are compliant, that we are compliant with employment law, with contracts, with policies, with disciplinary and grievance policies. I think people, and I have noticed a lot of it, the people find it very difficult generally to have difficult conversations and follow those disciplinary procedures. So having that external resource takes that personal bit out of it. It's our external HR, even though we've worked with the teams a lot, it kind of makes it easier for staff, I think, to follow those disciplinary and grievance procedures if that comes about, which does. It also gives you the flexibility. So we go through phases of needing extra support and phases of not needing the extra support. So we're currently looking at all our policies and procedures, and it's budget time, so we're using the HR function a lot more at the moment. But we can do that because that's the joy of having someone external, is that you can call on those people at those critical times and those heavy workload times, and then ease off at other periods in the year. So we have we're looking at banding the benchmarking of our salaries, for instance, and seeing what other people in the charity sector are paying in their pay increases, and looking at the policies and procedures. So we're doing a lot more at the moment. The other thing that we use the HR for is to run our HR system, our software that manages our holidays, our sickness, and other leave. And so one of Anna's team runs that system for us, and then sends out the reports to the staff, so that I'm not there, which is already a very busy job, telling people that they've got holiday they need to use up. We're finding a system of that they will do that for me, so that people are using their holiday, noticing when people are off sick a lot, so that I'm not having to do that. I've got someone else who can do that for us as well. So that's another thing that I found really helpful. The independence I've talked about, international NGOs, also a new complexity, and the affordability. I think the downside that you could say of it, and Anna and I talk with the team about how when that person isn't part of the organisation, how do they keep on top of it? And that is all about the relationship between me, the people I work with, and the teams, and the SMT in particular, and how we interact with the HR, and we work hard to try and make it part of the organisation. But that is an issue when you don't have someone there. Although I have to say that in recent years since COVID, when a lot of people are working from home, that's an issue just generally. So I can't say that that's particular to the external person. It's a problem that we have with working with people who work remotely now. If you get a lot of issues, your costs can go up. I mean, you have to manage that, and as I say, you have to balance it over the year of up and down. But if you have an organisation that is very heavily dependent, then it's looking at why is that, and is this the right route for you? Because if you're using them all the time, would it be cheaper to have someone in? But the downsides are, what level do you get someone in, and do you have someone with enough experience? Because you probably need an administrator type post as well as the more senior level post. But it's important to note that you could start spending a lot of money if your organisation needs a lot of HR. And I think that is probably. I think I've covered most of the things that I need to cover, unless anyone else has any questions, which I think we're going to come to.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lisa and Anna. Indeed, we do have a few questions coming through, very interesting ones as well. I'm going to do them in a slightly different order in which they were given to me, because they fit more naturally in the order which I'm going to ask them to you. But first one is about can you elaborate more on the specific areas of HR that are A, simpler, and B, more complex to outsource? So this questioner is asking, if you're going to start the process of outsourcing, what are the key? They've asked for the top three areas, but where would you start as the most as the easiest areas to sort of bite off, really, in terms of outsourcing? Maybe I can come to you, Anna, and I've got my own question to follow up on this. But yeah, where would you start, Anna?
A really good question. I think I would start with the employee life cycle, because from recruitment through to exit interviews, that's everything that you'd expect an HR generalist outsourced team to be able to cope with. And as Lisa's pointed out, having some admin support in that team is really important too, because the simpler things to outsource are the sort of administrative headaches, the sending out the appraisal forms and making sure they all come back, making sure that the process has been followed for the employee engagement survey. So all of that lends itself very well to outsourced HR. However, having said that, that's the simple bit, the employee life cycle. But even the strategic stuff, external HR, I think is really helpful in terms of having an external view. And as Lisa's pointed out, external HR tend to have a view of many organisations. And I did spend, say 5-10 years ago, I was spending a lot of time trying to put NGOs in touch with each other because they were solving the same problems. So I was the kind of the mediator, say, oh, you do know that so-and-so is trying to solve the same issue. But I think we can add strategic value to the organisation because we're the external support with that. But that's probably more difficult because you have to think internally exactly what you're wanting from the outsourced support.
Yeah. And just to Lisa, maybe I can just sort of turn this question to you. But if you're thinking about if you've never outsourced this function before, how do you, and you've obviously done this. How do you develop a brief? How do you have that interaction with the potential kind of outsourcing company? What sort of things do you need to put together to get a kind of a useful version, a useful proposition back from a company that's going to handle your HR?
I think it is kind of like what Anna said. It's thinking about that onboarding, offboarding, and because the biggest headache is employing staff. That sounds awful, doesn't it? But it's what can you do for us to help with the onboarding and the contracts and the interviews and the questions and all of that, and setting out how you get someone in what would the cost be for doing that, and how could you help us with employment of staff and then maintenance of staff, as well as then what would you do over the course of the year to be able to help us with appraisals, job evaluation, payments, pay reviews and policies and procedures, as well as the offboarding of staff. What would you do to help us when a staff member leaves? What would your recommendations be on exit interviews? Even down to, could you make sure that we are consistent with our leave, as in notice periods and things like that? We've got an issue with what we've inherited in the past of contracts, making sure that contracts are up to date. So what could you do on those things to make sure our contracts are up to date? There's a consistency and a fairness amongst it, as well as a legality. So I would put the cases together of what you need people to do. And it's really those areas, getting people in, how do we maintain them? How do we exit them? I think is the basic.
Yes. And there must be some. What I've observed, with bond members, is there are often of a certain size where there's just one person who does HR. It must be quite. I mean, in a way, having some degree of outsourcing must be quite useful in terms of, because often the HR person is housed in the finance function. They're a kind of one-off. They've got nobody to bounce ideas off other people in the organisation. It's just an observation, isn't it? It must be having that sort of almost like a peer network or somewhere somebody to speak to for advice externally must be very, very useful, I would have thought.
Yeah, and I think that's where I saw in one of the charities that I was a trustee for, they had an internal HR manager that they had, so someone with a reasonable amount of experience. But this particular organisation used a firm of lawyers that did exactly the same kind of thing, but they had that resource that they paid a retainer fee for, where they could get that advice from. For me, like in my profession as a chartered accountant, it's like I would go to the auditors to be able to have those kind of things. It's like that type of thing. You don't have an auditor HR person, so that outsourced person is that effective, person that you can go and get that advice from.
Yeah. I've got an interesting question here from Alison, who's asking about the perspective from the staff side. So are there any downsides or upsides from the staff members' perspective, e.g. access to information on workplace rights and policies, union representation, access to HR mediation or grievance, promotion opportunities? So quite often the HR person is the go-to person for members of staff to just have a chat about their place in the workforce, and just bits of information. What if they're not there? Or I suppose that question is hinting at that. What would you? How do you? If you don't have that function, or it's outsourced. How do staff generally feel about that? Maybe Anna, you could start by responding to that.
I think it's really important that it's clear that the external HR support is there for the staff as well, as they would be internally. So, and I think I just want to be very clear with any staff member coming to me, if that was a confidential conversation, and I would give them advice about how they should handle it. So it might be that they have a grievance. How could they handle that with their colleague? Do they need to go to their line manager? Do they need to take it beyond that? So it should work in the same way as an internal function. I think sometimes where it doesn't work is where managers and staff don't think they have access, and they think they have to go through the person who procured them. That's a mistake. But with Lisa, it's made very obvious to staff that they have access to us. And obviously, I would let Lisa know that I'm doing that work, because otherwise she'll find that suddenly her bill has exploded that particular month because there have been some HR issues. But that's where we can nip them in the bud and support Lisa to solve it smoothly.
Yeah.
And I would just add to that as well, that, like I said, I think it was more of an issue when people were 100% in the office all the time. Not an issue. It was, you haven't got the physical presence to just hop in and see that person like in the old days. Now people are used to working with people remotely, so you can just hop into an office and get onto a Teams call with someone. It's the culture has changed in the last 6 years or so, 8 years, however, 6 years, isn't it, since COVID? So I think that makes it a lot more approachable. And yes, we do. I don't have the time to have people coming through me. So it's known that this is the HR function, and they have access.
Right, thank you. And we've got a really interesting question from Paul here, who's specifically asking for advice for a smaller organisation. So he's got 11 staff and a £1 million budget. So he says we have some ops staff, but no HR specialist. So our simpler admin functions like payroll are not that big or worth outsourcing, but we probably use an external for specific projects like pay, salary, benchmarking. Where for that size of organisation, where would you start?
It's interesting because our smallest company has 3 employees and they still use our time. Yeah. So it's not size that matters. I think it's about what HR support you need, and that's the question to address. So even with 11 staff members, what is it that is taking up your time? Is it access to just the advice from outside, because we can come in and mentor? I think it's really important that we do have a point of contact. So Lisa is my point of contact. So I work closely with her, because you can't just say, oh, well, this is HR support for all of you. You need to have a sort of a flag point with the organisation. But yeah, so we work from 3 people with 3 staff up to those who have, big projects. We've worked with those with 500, but outsourced, it probably works up to 100 and 150 before you really need an internal person full time.
Yeah, I mean, the charities I've worked with tend to be around a similar size to what I'm working in now. I did work in one that had about 100 employees that did have, during the last few months of me being in that job, we did actually get an HR manager in post, because there were so many. It was what I was saying about the cost. There started to be so many HR issues that actually it was more cost effective for us to get an HR manager in to deal with all of those at that point. Depends on the charity and the type of employees and the nature of it all as well. But as I said, I tend to oversee it and get people, and we do actually outsource our payroll, but we could have it inside, but we're just too small with the finance team. It's pensions as well. That's the other thing you've got, and that there's a crossover then between HR and that pensions provider, something else I don't need to have to worry about as much.
Presumably, however small you are, your obligations around employment law and compliance to that are exactly the same as any size of organisation.
As soon as you start to employ people, it gets complicated.
Yes. Sorry, go on, Lisa.
I was just going to say, and that's where I think sometimes people just don't realise, and they don't realise that the law has changed as well, because it does change, and there are things that come in, and unless that you're on it and are in kind of in tune with that world, you wouldn't necessarily know that there have been changes. So but we do, as you say, have those same responsibilities no matter what side you are.
Yeah. Another question here is, do you have any examples where business partnering in HR has been outsourced? Anna, can you just explain what business partnering in HR means?
Well, business partner is really the central HR team working with functions in the business, and often they're divided. So you might have one business partner working for the finance and IT team. You might have the other working with the fundraising team. So they're dedicated people. And the great thing about business partnering is that they understand that function, and they understand, well, they should understand the mission of the business or the charity as well. But I see outsourced HR in the same way. I need to understand SolarAid that Lisa works with and understand their mission, because if I don't, then I don't understand what's needed in terms of HR and the people coming into the organisation. So it can work. You outsource to your external HR person just in the same way as you have internal BPs, business partners. I'm sure there's a better explanation of business partnering. It's much more complex than that, but I think the model that David Ulrich brought in, gosh, was it 20, 30 years ago, is still relevant today.
Lisa, did you want to come in on that at all? Or?
No, I don't. Yeah, I've not really dealt with it in that way. No.
Yeah.
So I don't have anything else to add to that.
And you touched on this in your presentation, Anna, but there's the potential for everything to change through it because of AI. But where do you see the I could probably ask this question in 6 months and you'd probably give me a different answer. But but where do you see the kind of the immediate changes or benefits coming into the HR function from AI, or is that to do with saving on expenditure, or is it about improving the service, so extending it?
Well, I think it does both. I think it definitely save costs and time. Well, I suppose time is cost. So some of the tools have been around for ages. So that doing shortlisting for recruitment, if you get 150 CVs, doing that manually is difficult. And I think what we need to understand about AI, you cannot take it at face value. You have to interrogate it, add the human value, our brain cells, because I think we tend to think that, oh yeah, that's a done job, tick, AI has produced this. And I'm getting wary of, or more and more wary of candidates who are writing any tests or whatever that they've been asked to prepare in advance using AI to do it, because you can spot those they may have used AI and good for them, but they've added value to it. I know that's not a HR function, but I'm just saying that you need to be spotting that and seeing who is using AI and who isn't. The other thing is that it will enhance the HR function, because all those simple things, the length of time it takes to do, summarize reports, let the board know what's happening, what the trends are in the organisation. Just trying to think of other things around sickness leave. All of that needs to be more automated, so that HR can add the values. What is this telling us, and what do we need to be mindful for the future?
Yeah.
Can I add to that as well? So I agree. You need a human to if you're using it to check that it's correct, because it's not always correct. I smile because Anna and I are working on an AI policy, because everyone's got a bit too AI happy in most organisations. And what I think that people don't realise, and I certainly know that this is the case in our organisation, is that when you're putting stuff into AI, you've got to be careful which AI you're putting it into, because you are then throwing your information out into the open world. And that's fine if it's open information, but you've got to be very careful with sensitive. So what we're working on is a policy that will actually block certain AI tools, so that we protect the information that is sensitive to stay in the environment that we want it to stay in, and it's used as an aid and not as a an inadvertent threat to us in the end. So, it has to be done with caution. So that's another thing that we're working on, is getting a policy and trying to work with our external IT suppliers to try and put this together. And then there's the education and the training, which again, Anna and her team are helping us with rolling out.
Just one of the things, I was talking to somebody the other day about, not to do with HR, but just to do with using AI to interpret data. And one of the things they said was in the north, the quality of the data sets is much better, and so there's a sort of inbuilt disadvantage to global majority sort of data sets, and they kind of get their data's less well interpreted. I just wondered whether, from a sort of AEDI diversity perspective, whether the use of AI in HR has to be treated very carefully or interpreted very carefully. I suppose it's the same principle of just not taking it at face value. Would that be correct?
I think it is. I haven't really put too much thought to that, but I do think there is an issue about it being compliant with EDI. So yes, not taking it at face value is definitely the thing to go away with in terms of artificial intelligence. In fact, I'm going to tell a story against myself. I was interested that I wanted to interrogate AI about a question I had. I was doing a presentation for something, so I put it into the question in, and actually it came up with an article that I'd written for this organisation some months ago. And I thought, I cannot be the world's expert on this particular subject, but AI told me that I was. I'm not vain enough to think that I am. It's just that probably the IP address, how it was feeding back to me, was telling me this information. So I think we have to be very wary of it. I don't think that answers your question, Mike, but I think it's view it with suspicion, but do see how it can help with some of the basic tasks.
Yeah. Lisa, anything from you?
I mean, I hadn't thought of it in that kind of thing. I know that you've got your chat GPTs where you put stuff out and it learns from everyone's intelligence and information, but that's one of the worst for putting your stuff out into the open world. So, and using your Copilot with the little, what I learned recently from our IT places, where you've got your Copilot license and it's got the green kind of kite mark in the corner is a protected AI. So therefore, because they learn, interesting, something I'm going to have to think about. But everything has to be done with caution, and with learning, it's how much you're putting in it. I don't know. We're at the beginning of this. I use AI a lot to help with some of the rephrasing of things, and so it's I think we're at the beginning. Things to think about, though. Food for thought.
Yes, I know. I noticed on Copilot the other day. It's a sort of I fed it in a sort of an HRE type question, and it sort of gave me a whole set of answers. And at the bottom it said, "Would you like me to draft an email to your HR manager in response to?" And I was like, "Oh wow!" So it's kind of yes, you can. And then there's a little sort of caveat at the bottom. This information may be wrong or incorrect. It's just finally, going back to the sort of process of when you're thinking about outsourcing, Lisa, who should be involved within the organisation in terms of the selection, choice, and the parameters of how does that work? Has it just been something you've done yourself, or do you involve who takes part in that process?
I mean, certainly the SMT. So the senior management team or senior leadership team, and often you would get some of the trustees involved as well. It's usually good to get the trustees. Depends on your type of trustees you've got, but I would certainly say the senior leadership team and probably the chair of board or someone who has an expertise. Sometimes I've worked with boards where you've got an HR person on the board. They're always good to have there. You use your trustees. They are there to support and to help. So, you know, I do use them where I can.
Yeah. And Anna, who would you like to have in the room, sort of asking you questions? From
It's interesting that not many organisations involve their board and senior team. So often I go to clients, it would be the finance and resources person, or it might just be the HR team if they've got a team that they just want more expertise outside. So I think it depends, but more and more I think that for something like this, it is important to involve staff members as well. Perhaps a staff member that you trust and who you know would be good in giving their views of whether you felt this outsourced provider would be a good addition to the organisation.
Yes, and I suppose, you know, I think particularly since COVID, there have been so many challenges for organisations around culture and expectations of culture. So it's, I think, involving staff in the thinking around what kind of people function an organisation has is quite important, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And we did actually have a staff group, saying that we did have a staff group in the one where I said we got the HR manager actually ended up being employed. There was a staff group, but it was a much larger organisation. You soon find out from the staff anyway, but yeah, I think it's good to involve them.
Yes. Yes, I think lots of CEOs say they soon find out from their staff.
I get a lot of messages about stuff, so
yes,
I tend to know.
Yeah. So there, thank you very much, Anna and Lisa. That's fantastic. Really good, interesting discussion. Thank you for the presentations. Anybody on the call, if you've got subsequent questions that you want to follow up with Anna, we'll send you her contact details and loads of stuff to think about there. And I'm sure, you know, we should probably do a kind of another sort of webinar on outsourcing other functions, because I know some organisations are outsourcing all kinds of fundraising and finance and so on. So thank you very much, Anna and Lisa, and thank you for everyone's questions and participating today. So good morning, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.